Okay, arch nemesis number 2. Maybe this should be number 1, I'm not sure. Cogongrass. This one's been around since the 40s. It was really first found in Alabama and Mobile, and then brought to Brooksville and Gainesville as a potential forage, and quickly learned that it wasn't any good for forage. And one of the very old publications from the experiment station said, maybe invasive. Boy, were they right, huh? So, it's pretty much everywhere in the world except Antarctica. Rhizome formation, which is basically how that plant is surviving under the ground, begins at the 3 to 4 leaf stage. So if you do have a seedling, rhizome formation starts very quickly. We'll talk about why that's so important in a minute. They produce around 3,000 seeds per plant. And when I first got here, my colleagues were like, oh, they produce the seeds, but they're not that viable. But we're starting to find populations have become increasingly more viable as time goes on. And I think once those populations from different parts of the state have mixed, they've actually started some outcrossing, now we're getting viable seed. Okay. All right, so grows best, moderate soils, low organic matter, low fertility, low pH. What I just described.
South Florida.
South Florida, exactly. Adapted to full sun, but it does tolerate some pretty significant shading as well. Okay? All right, so think about our environment. What happens from about now through May? What does not come from the sky? We hardly get any rain, right? So, this plant will sacrifice what's above ground to keep what's growing below ground alive. Okay? Has anybody walked through a patch of coconut grass that's been around for a while? How tall was it?
You can go up.
Yeah, exactly. All right. How much of the total plant biomass do you think this represents? If you measured this and below ground.
Half.
Half?
Third.
You're close. You're getting cold.
Like an iceberg?
It's about, 70 to 80% of the total plant biomass is below ground. That's amazing. But that's how that plant is surviving, because it's depending on its rhizome system. Okay? It also is thought to have some allelopathic properties, which means it is throwing chemicals out into the soil. So as the rhizome system grows out and it's exuding that material, it's actually preventing the growth of other plants as it's invading. All right. It likes a hot fire. Well, actually, it doesn't like it. It starts hot fires. And these fires get so hot, they actually destroy our native species. All right, so I'm going to talk about some of the cultural stuff first, and then we'll get into some of the herbicide data. Well, can we farm it out? And we can. But there's key words here. Repeated, frequent tillage. It's got to break up the rhizomes, and it needs to be during our dry season, so the rhizomes will actually dry out. If we tried to do this in the middle of the summer, all it's going to do is aggravate the rhizomes and get more shoots coming, and those rhizomes will never dry out. All right. What I call recreational tillage, not necessarily a good thing. Essentially, we end up spreading the rhizomes around, and you get more plants growing, and will go elsewhere. And normally, if you're doing recreational tillage, you're not cleaning off the equipment, and you're going to transport rhizomes to another location. All right. My friends that grow wildlife food plots usually are not always, but are sometimes a source for Cogongrass spread, and also cutting fire pits. All right. This might get to your question. You asked, why is it not killing plants for 12 months? We're talking about control, usually. But what's eradication? Eradication. All right. This might get to your question. You asked, why is it not killing plants for 12 months? We're talking about control, usually. But what's eradication? Eradication is completely removing everything viable to that species. Seeds, rhizomes, and top biomass. All right, so this was some work that was done in Alabama by Stephen Enlow. And he looked at glyphosate and imazapyr, Roundup or Arsenal. And this is rhizome biomass per quarter square meter. So rhizome biomass was about 200 grams before he sprayed. He sprayed one time. It dropped anywhere from 50 grams to about 125 grams 1 year after treatment. He sprayed a second time. The rhizome biomass dropped further, but he never got to 100% control. And I haven't seen if he's updated this yet at all or not, but 3 applications of glyphosate, he wasn't getting 100% control of the rhizomes. So that's key. If we want to get rid of the Cogongrass, we want to kill the rhizome system. We compared that with Arsenal, same amount of biomass at the beginning, but one application, we dropped it to almost a 90% reduction in rhizome biomass. And 2 years out, with 2 applications, almost 100%. So by far, Arsenal's a lot better in reducing the rhizome biomass. Okay, so over a 3-year period, imazapyr 1 time per year, and this is data, reminding you, this is data from Alabama, spring, summer, or fall, worked for them. Glyphosate, it had to be applied 2 times a year. And if they used a combination treatment, which a lot of people like to do, 1 time per year, but really this wasn't any better than Arsenal enough. All right, let me make sure. So what works for us? For us, granted we haven't measured rhizome biomass, but for what works for us, fall applications of Roundup 3 to 5% or 1% of imazapyr for Arsenal. All right, and I'm talking spot treatments in that case. Hopefully, most of us don't have acres and acres and acres of Cogongrass at this point. Is it around? Absolutely. But retreatment, it's got to be part of your plan. With Cogongrass, we can't spray it 1 time, walk away, and think we're done. Not going to happen. I think Alabama's data showed us that pretty easily. I do believe, though, with Roundup, if that's your choice, every 6 months, you need to be going back to those locations, making sure nothing's coming back.
What about the vegetation height? We've done it several different ways on some of our properties. We went in, we would either bush hog it or burn it, and as soon as we got the sprouts coming up, we'd go in and apply application of chemical to it. We wasn't getting that good a kill rate on it. Once we started letting the leaves get up to like 6 to 12 inches high, then apply the chemical to it, we was getting more kill rate rate, and we was asking some people about it, they stated that the leaves wasn't getting enough chemical when they was small to carry them back down to the roots. So we had to wait till they got, they said the ideal kill rate is 6 to like 14 inches on that to apply your chemical to. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, I was trying to look up our recommendations real quick. I couldn't remember off the top of my head. From when we burned, I wanted to say we waited a full month.
Killing it?
We was, because it was on the Yeehaw property where we was experimenting that, and, like I said, our idea was to catch once it was re-sprouting back up, but, we didn't have that good a success with it. Once we allowed the leaves to get, about 14 inches, then we'd spray it, then it would die off, and once it would start coming back up, we'd go back in and retreat it. So, another thing that we found with it was, disking, get the rhizomes turned back up, and,
Stick part of the south road.
You mean this after you burn, the soil is dry, so
correct.
not replanted.
Right,
Not
right.
moist, wet.
So, if I remember from what Dr. McDonald said, I don't have it in my fact sheet, we say 1 to 4 months after burning.
But like I said, we wasn't just burning, we even tried, going in and bush hogging it down, and we was waiting for them to regrow and pop back up. Where, we didn't waste so much chemical because it was so thick, you ain't gonna hit every leaf, so we even tried to go in and bush hog it and wait till it started re-sprouting back up too. So,
Yeah, some people don't like bush hogging because they leave so much thatch there, and a lot of times you end up, the grass doesn't always make it through that thatch by the time it's spread. So that's the drawback to mowing. If I was going to do something cultural before a herbicide, I'd definitely burn it. Helps. But yeah, there's no silver bullet one-time thing. I had a guy from forestry tell me a couple weeks ago that when they tried burning, it wouldn't grow back for 12 months. And then when it did, it finally grew like gangbusters. So, in his case, they didn't like to burn because they didn't feel like they got any kill at all. So, I have not experienced that myself. Normally, when we burn it,
it comes, you start
it's
getting.
racing back.
Within, if you had any rainfall, within a week or so, you get re-sprouted.
Right. Any more questions on Doug before I go forward? It's already 11 o'clock. That's good though. All right, Blackberry. Real quick, we have 2 species in Florida that I feel are most problematic. Sand blackberry has these 3 leaflets, and the leaflets are rounded. High bush blackberry has more serrated leaf edges and actually comes to a point. Okay? A lot of times I feel like we get hybridization between these 2 species because you go out and think, well, it looks like high bush blackberry, but it also looks like sand blackberry. So which one do I have? Well, if you go out and spray them, and if one comes back really fast, it's more than likely high bush. It seems to be a little bit more tolerant than sand blackberry. When Dr. Farrell and myself, we first started at UF, our recommendations for blackberry control were to spray in the spring at bloom. Okay, what's the problem with spraying in the spring at bloom in Florida? It's pretty dry. So when we started looking at fall versus spring applications, we were finding that remedy applied in the fall was much better long-term than remedy applied in the spring. About a 50% difference between the two application times. And we saw this consistently from down in this part of the state all the way up through Gainesville. And metsulfuron really is a very good Blackberry product. So if you're able to apply metsulfuron or chaparral, then this is a very good product to use. It actually performs a little bit better than the remedy or pasture yard. Okay, so real quickly, with chaparral, we tried this a couple years ago on Blackberry control, and basically we found about 80% or greater control. And this is basically a reduction in ground cover a year after. We added 2,4-D in here to help safen the Bahia grass, because we actually applied this in the Bahia grass pasture. We found that if we apply 2,4-D with the chaparral, the Bahia grass doesn't respond as negatively as with chaparral alone. So, for example, this is Bahia grass biomass in response to application of this is chaparral at 2, 2.5, and 3 ounces. If we apply chaparral alone, we get about a 50% reduction in biomass compared to our untreated. But if we apply 2,4-D with it, we only suffer about a 20% to 30% loss in the hay grass mass. Okay. So I feel pretty confident that, especially this was applied during the winter months, so November, December, when the Bahia grass has kind of gone dormant. I feel like we can get away with this type of program as long as we add 2,4-D to it, especially if you have Blackberry, pretty dense Blackberry in the patch. All right, so our recommendations, a lot of people are still going with a 2-pint rate of remedy, which is what I'm calling a full rate. And with that, I feel like you get rapid brownout of the leaves fall off. With a pint per acre, that brownout isn't as rapid, and I feel like you get more remedy down into the root system, and you get equivalent levels of control. So my thought is save the extra money and plan on a 2-year program, because it's going to take 2 years even with full rate. Teller, I talked about this earlier in the program, 1 ounce per acre, most consistent. There's more consistent than remedy. And then chaparral or metsulfuron, apply in late fall, especially when the Bahia grass is dormant, and add 2,4-D to help save the Bahia grass injury. All right, Dewberry. Does anybody have Dewberry in pasture?
What rate on the chaparral?
Chaparral is 2.5 to 3 ounces.
2.5 per acre.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Dewberry, instead of growing upright trails on the ground, not overly common, but has been found in some areas. Teller is the only product I've found that has fairly good activity on it. So you spray it in the fall, come back in the spring, you thought you've done pretty good, go back the following July, and you'll see it starting to grow back. And you go back the next fall, you might have decreased it by about 20%. Okay? So it's something that's going to take repeated applications. All right. Yeah. I'm going to skip through the thistle real quick. I wanted to talk about tea weeds. 2 species of tea weed. Southern sida, which is this one here, has more glossy leaves, and arrowleaf sida, which has more dull leaves. This has hairs on the leaves, this one does not. Okay? So 2 species. I'm finding it really doesn't matter which species we have control-wise. And we looked at metsulfuron at a ½ ounce, Telar plus remedy. So this is probably a pretty expensive mix. Telar at 1 ounce, Pasture Guard HL at 1½ pints, and remedy at 2 pints. All right, so look at remedy. 2 pints, 30 to 60 days. We're doing pretty good. We get out to 90 days, our control's dropping below 80%. Pasture Guard, pretty much the same thing. Still hanging on around 85% at 90 days. Telar didn't look so good at first. It increased to about 90% and then dropped. Telar plus remedy, really no advantage. And then metsulfuron again, looks good in the beginning, but dropped her to about 60% at 90 days. So what's this data telling you? Over time, the control is going to drop regardless of what herbicide program we use. So I think this is just going to be the nature of this beast. It's something that we're going to have to look at repeated applications over time. They produce a lot of seeds per plant. If you've mowed the pasture several times, you've got a big root mass underneath the ground that you're not even thinking about. It becomes woody with time. It's just a difficult plant to control. Even if you kill that root, you have all those seeds in the soil. You don't have any grass growing. And sometimes even if you do have grass growing, they germinate and get above that grass canopy pretty quickly. So, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of good answers. And Dr. Furl and myself joke about which product sucks less. Okay, long term. So, all right. Lantana, have this in isolated areas. Our standard is Vista plus Milestone, and it's not cheap. Fall into spring application, you need it both to get this level of control. If you do it once, control stays around 70%. Now, if DuPont gets aminocyclopyrrochlor registered, then we're going to be much better off. Perspective does really well at 18 months. And this is the perspective plot at 1 year after treatment. So we have 1 lone survivor in the entire plot. So it's pretty good. Okay, Flattop Goldenrod. Tend to find this in pastures that have low levels of fertility, low pH. What I found is basically anything that has dicamba or 2,4-D in it does pretty well. And Weedmaster and Grazing Systems are probably my favorite treatments, economically speaking. Okay? The key to flat top control is it must be applied when it has 1 stem. Once that stem starts branching, control drops significantly. If you sprayed those same treatments, Grazing Systems and Weedmaster, the top 2, on this pasture right here, it would do absolutely nothing.
Can you raise pH to a point where it regresses?
I haven't tried that yet, but I've wanted to for multiple reasons. Not only for that species, but also Broomsedge. So I want to go out in the fall, chop it, to put lime on it.
I can tell you that pastures we've had that have Broomsedge, Flattop Goldenrod, we went in a line, and it was almost a distinct line where the line truck was at, where we missed the time to see those plants. That's the pH.
Yeah. I fully expect that to happen, but I haven't tried to prove it to myself. I was trained in the show me state. All right, Broomsedge, speaking of that, a number of different species. We have no selective herbicides. The only thing we could do is spot treat with glyphosate in Bahia grass pastures. If it's in Bermuda grass or stargrass, we can use a pint per acre of glyphosate after it's cut off for hay. And that's really our only option for that. A lot of people relate broomsedge invasion to pH. We looked at several different counties who went into broomsedge infested pastures, and we found pH to be all over the board. 5.9, 6, 4.5, 4.3. It really didn't matter what pH level we were at. One site in Polk County, the rancher told me that the population had declined. It was still there, but it had declined. And this was the... But pH does have an impact on broomsedge height. And this was done in the greenhouse. See, plants growing at pH of 4.5 were substantially taller than the plants growing at 5.5 and 6.5. So yeah, pH probably has an effect, but is it the cure-all answer for removing broomsedge from the pasture? Probably not. All right, I think this is my last slide. I hope so, because we still have to go to the field before we eat. So, I finally drank the water and worked with Dennis getting a wiper for the station. I don't really care for wipers all that much. I'd much rather go out and broadcast a herbicide. I think it's quicker. I think it's more economical. But I do see where it has to fit. And right now, without any selective herbicide for broomsedge control, I think that's something that we can look at in the future. This was actually done by the wiper at the station. And Dennis, I've been trying to remember what rate we used. Was it 20%? 20% glyphosate. I know of a grower in Okeechobee that's using as low as 5% glyphosate. And I think it all depends on how much you wipe that roller as it's going across the field. All right, so this was taken approximately 10 days after the broomsedge was wiped. It was turning brown. But we had to mow that 2 weeks after it was done. So we'll see next spring what population we're at in the long term. So, but I do think the wipers have a fit. Not my preferred method for weed control, especially for a lot of our broadleaf weeds. But in a no-win scenario, I think it does.
You wipe any smut grass?
I have not personally. I have seen it wiped in Okeechobee, and this year it looks much better than normal. Yeah.
Same kind of rate?
He was using 5% his mix. And he wiped, I had him do two different ways. Wiped one time versus wiped twice in different directions. And where he wiped it twice, you can see a significant difference.
Always the same application, one way to one back, twice.
Right, all the same application. Not at different times. Any questions? Okay.